Pastoral Theology Part 1. Not too sure if I recall staying in page 3. Yes, page 3. I believe we stayed there, Victor. So if whenever you have a chance to view this recording, I'm going to start on page 3 and just continue. I know it's a bit lengthy, but you can always go in and um, scroll in and go in and read it on your own. I'm just going to cover the key points since I did miss last week's class. And I do apologize for that, but it was under circumstances that, I had this accent, stuff like that, but um, all good, but I apologize. We are on page 3, so we're going to continue from there. And like I said, I'll just give you some pointers as far as what's going to be in the test for the following week, which is on the 27th, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. And you take it from there help in anything in any way, but just give me a text. You. Um, so on page 3, it says make a comparison of the pastor with other spiritual ministries. Here it explains basically, and you can find it in Ephesians, Romans, and Corinthians there in your book as well. There are many different ministries in the church. As there's the prophet, and all of it has uh for the same cause. Um, and here in the book says the pastor is a different ministry though. From that, the evangelists and these are different from others. The evangelist gains souls for Christ and goes elsewhere. In other words, he's not stable in one particular place in a church. Whether you have a pastor where he does stay stable in a church and flock, takes care of his flocks. Then you have like the prophet and the teachers that help out, in the ministry as well. And it says here, similarity that is how the ministries of the prophet, apostle, and teachers they are different from many others. In other words, they even though they target different things, but we're all in the same, I guess per se boat that we're, getting saving recalling and also recruiting, people that are needing of salvation and liberation and just trying to get them to put their views in Christ. Um, if you continue downward, explain the unique character of the pastorate consists of. Well, basically, the pastor is a unique ministry because it requires unique character of well-defined character, victorious in spirit, and despite all the problem that he or she might have, it requires faith, vision, and permanent action in favor of work of the Lord. The pastor can spend years in the same place and preach all the time without bothering the congregation. Focus on the congregation, of course. And then you have some scriptures that you can read in Timothy, 1 of Timothy 3 and 7, so forth. And then you have in the second paragraph the summarizing of the general responsibilities of the pastorate. The pastor must exercise his ministry, aware that he or she must proclaim the kingdom, establish the kingdom, retain the kingdom, and extend the kingdom of heaven in a place that corresponds to him as a pastor. Then you have the last paragraph. The pastor, after the Lord Jesus Christ in his ministry, is the highest authority in the church. In other words, the pastor is the ultimate spiritually and physically, of course, the authority in the church. He or she is in charge of taking care of God's flock. He is the one that will give God the account of his stewardship. In other words, whatever happens to a certain amount of people or any person in a matter of given time or place in the church, he's accounted for, or she's accounted for that person, and why did she leave, or why did this happen, and so forth. He would have to um, give account to God first for the what if happened to this person. Um, what else? God, that it says also say here that he attends to every person regardless of their social class by their moral and spiritual conditions. And then also there you have in Hebrews 13:17 and so forth for your reading. Just remember the bullets. I'm gonna just give you a brief. Uh, just remember that God is above the pastor. God gave him the calling, and everything he has, he shall be taken upon account for. If you go on to the next page, page 4, explains what the pastor mentality consists of. Um, Here you have different types of circumstances and life situations in life. What mentally what a pastor can go through. I mean, he is human as we are. He is a person as we are. He goes through trials. He goes through, seasons. He goes through different things that we go through as human beings. So we have to take in consideration that he's also a person that goes through, problems. But the difference is that he needs to maintain his focus on attending the congregation and being very strong in the faith and continue on. And then during this paragraph, if you go into maybe the middle portion of the paragraph, it's a huge paragraph. It says here that the talks about the different types of it talks about tapes and cassettes. This is like a little bit old school, but it's talking about the difference between cassette tape containing everything that the person has lived. It can be said that we have three basic tapes. They're comparing it like tapes like cassette tapes back in the 80s. But now let's say it's maybe a CD now, I guess, or USB now. But here it's talking about the three types of tapes: the father tape, the child tape, and the adult tape. And there you can always go into more detail of what the differences they're talking about. It's basically just about experiences and education, how each type of tape uh, goes into and what action it consists of, what responsibilities they might have, such as the child versus the adult and the adult versus the father figure and so forth. So just go in and just read a bit on it. Um, I believe there's going to be a question on that one. Um, in a moment, I will be sharing you like more of the key points where to look for, or particularly like where to target the answers that you can find in within the test for next week. So if we skip on to page number 5, and of course I'm going, pretty quickly because it's a lot of information, and I do apologize. Like I said, it's when we began the class, we were gonna separate by weeks, but things happen, and well, I'm trying to do as best as I can as far as for giving you the class. We're on page 5. Here it says establish the difference between relations between personality, character, and temperament. Basically, here is just giving you a different perspective of how personality, character, and temperament can be simplified by determining each of these characteristics factors in a human being. How do you differentiate, I guess, between what's temper, what's character, and what's personality type? If you look into your book, you have exactly the meanings of temperament. It's an innate thing. It's something that is within you that you have already. when you were born, you probably learned as a very young age, maybe within months, that you know how to get mad, and nobody taught you how to get mad. It's something that it's innate in you. Then you have um, your character that builds within when you start growing up. You start making relationships and starting to grow, and you start building a character, either of sense of being, well-being, or temperament, anger. It varies on different persons. And then you have your personality, how you are as a person. And like I said, it's there. You have specifically like the the details of what each relationship between each other are. So you can go in and check into it. Personality, like for example, personality is the apparent transparency reflection of the transparent of the character of person or individual. So that's how the person is. And then you have your character is something that is a result of education, how they've been raised, etc. And that builds in, that molds you into your character, and then it reflects on your personality. Then you have the next bullet, establish the difference and relationship between Christian's character and character of the pastor, between both differences. So you can also read into more depth as far as both differences between the Christian character. And it says there it's the result of spiritual experiences and biblical and Christian's teachings. This character is one that manifests the Christian's behavior of the believer. And then you have the character of the pastor. Here it says that it's a higher degree of maturity than the church members in general. In other words, like I said, he is the authority in the church. He is human as well, like and I mentioned before, but he needs to put his the role of the pastor is, a little bit more of a lot of responsibility, of course, but more of you see the pastor say, well, nothing happens to him. Well, he does, but he has to have his head up high because he's representing authority, and he needs to make sure that the church members in general sees him as a authority figure. Okay, present concept, the personal behavior of the pastor. Here they're talking about the pastor, due to his vocation, has achieved a high level of maturity, a sense of duty. Here you can read on your own once you have a chance. Um, Talking about how a formal person in his relationship, both congregation and will all people. He's a Christian and will lives as such. He gives him a certain reflection of dignity. So of course, back Pastor Thorian, Pastor shows, you know, character shows mm, his personality shows by what he is and who he is and how he acts and how he perceives things to be done. Explain what the pastor's philosophy consists of. It is character way of thinking. Each person has his own philosophy, an own way of thinking and believing. And when thinking, he makes his world. The pastor has his own philosophy as a person, but influence of his vocation as a pastor. And here's just basically real simple. It's just how he sees things and how he views things. That's how he thinks about life. That's how he lives, and that's how he administers. And if you go on to page 6, like I said, I'm going pretty fast, but like I said, you're all more than welcome just to go by, and go back in reference to these pages where I am going over it. You have page 6 on the top, first bullet, says express the need for good spirits in the pastor. By good spirits, we understand a good way of interpret life with all of its problems. Like I said, he's human, circumstances and situations. We find the good side of each situation, no matter how negative it seems. Believing that everything will be in our favor and our work in the church and the pastor. Explain the need for an educated pastor. Why is this important for a pastor to be educated? The pastor should be an example of education. for his flock. Remember, he is the authority, plus he also needs to be viewed as educated. Education is reflected in dealing with locals and strangers, in their way of dressing, in their demeanor, and in the acts of require appropriate presentation before observers. And there you have, some text there that you can read also in reference to this. Proverbs and chapters 2 to 9. You can read them on your own. Then we have the next bullet. Name a few negative habits, as many positive habits possible of the pastor. Here you have an explanation of what is bad habits and then what are positive habits. And you can read that on your own, of course. Just giving you brief descriptions of what are bad habits that a pastor might have. Doesn't mean that they all have it. No, they might. You might see some things in him or in her, or you might not. You might see some positive ones. You might see some negative ones. Doesn't mean that he's a bad pastor or, a mean pastor or a negligent, pastor or whatever. But no, it varies on person to person, like they mention here. But they're just habits. Like the first one says, bringing greater depth to the budget without paying anything. In other words, here we are as the church members and we're paying our tithes and our offerings and things like that, and then yet he doesn't pay. Well, can it happen? Yes, it has happened before. I've heard, other places, but it goes back to how he sees things, how he view things. There's several like, things there that you can go into detail. Um, his physical representation, walking in late, into the church. Those are like little bad habits that can, they can be viewed as, okay, if I come late, why not? I can come late. Or if the pastor doesn't show up, well, why do we have to be here early, etc. Lack of preparation for the preaching, things like that. Those are the bad habits. And then you have the positive habits. Paying his debts, paying his dues, being punctual, good physical presentation. Totally the opposite of the bad habits. Basically in a nutshell, right? So let's go on to page 7. Page 7 explains the pastor's attitude towards his commitments. And here basically he's talking about the seriousness and the punctuality and the compliance that he has or she has. Maybe he doesn't commit to what he can't fulfill. He tries or she tries at all costs to fulfill the commitments that the pastor, he or she, has already. And then here we continue to explain the need of a human relationship in a pastor. Like I said, he's human too. So how to understand him when he's going through his situations, even though most of the times he will not reflect that among the congregation. What else here? Mm. Here we have present, this is the third bullet, present a concept of the public life of a pastor. Because you are a pastor, you are already a public person. We as servants there at the church, we are public figures, so we have to present ourselves in a good manner. If the pastor shows up, in uniform or in his suit, then we should reflect how to dress and how to act, how to talk in our own ways as well. But sometimes we see differently, of course. It doesn't mean that we're just going to brush people off. No, as a pastor has to attend to his flock. You're going to have flocks that are dirty. You're going to have flocks that are, clumsy. So you just have to just rear them in and talk to them and say, you know what, you know, let's focus on how to, stop the cussing words and so forth of his flock. So he's just there to attend to the congregation and to be a public figure as well as a pastor who leads the flock into the right direction, which is Christ. Express the attitude of a pastor towards human pain. Same thing, he's human. He sees things, he feels things, she feels things. We're human. So some pastors can express through, their emotions. some through words, some through prayer, some through just hugging. And now everybody's different. All pastors are different in how they cope with feelings and pain. Um, Here it specifically talks about the sensitivity of human pain. He is a minister of the, of course, but he feels or senses the terrible destruction that will come on the world and tries to free people from horrendous and internal suffering. He tries to do as what he needs to do to get his flock to follow the right path. But sometimes little sheep like to stray away and they go into trials and a lot of problems. So sometimes what happens is that they see the little sheep, or in this case, of course, the person, right? And gets into trouble, maybe like got into jail or had an accident, and he understands the suffering, he understands the pain. But in a case like a jail, well, he might have spoken to that person and did not listen, and yet, there he goes. So he does visits and things like that. He doesn't ignore the person just because he did not listen to the pastor, but he has to continue pastorizing. Okay, I apologize. My battery went dead on me. Sorry about that, Victor. If you guys, you can continue where we left up before this interruption. We're going into the relationship. So, page 7, present the concept of the public life of the pastor here. Um, He's a public figure as well that we were talking about. And the pastor is in the light of the public opinion. He can be recognized as well as censored. Your duty is to maintain your integrity and depend on God for your work. And it goes into Corinthians 5:11, 6 to 13, Proverbs, and you can read that on your own as well. Then we have the next bullet, express the attitude of pastor towards human pain. Okay, we read that already. Concept of the pastor's private life. The pastor is a private life in is subject. It's the same way as everyone else in his home and his family. It's no different. He has the same obligations as others, but he is an example of faith, of spiritual life. He has, or she has, is devotional moments as she lives in peace with his family. If we continue to the next page, here you have on page 8, express the need for pastors' prayer life in private, in the church, in special circumstances. The pastor is the first of all ministers of God. God is the owner of the work that the pastor attends. God is the employer, if you want to see it that way. He is the partner of the pastor. Therefore, the pastor is a worker of God. He is an employee of God, an employee of trust. Therefore, you can do nothing without first consulting him. He has to spend a lot of time with God. He has to talk and agree with his boss. Private prayer. It means the communication with God. The prayer that the pastor makes in private is the most effective to be sure of what he has to do. Prayer in the church is effective in favor of believers. In special circumstances, the pastor prays as an act of his work. And then you have also there some text to read Luke 16 and continue reading it at your will. Then we have the next bullet list in order priority the many occupations of the pastor in daily administration of his time. And here they're talking about how he spent his time or how it needs to be used, I guess, to spend his time. If you look there at the book, you have about 10 priorities in general terms. I mean, it it's seen nowadays that it's more now prayer than it is preaching, but it varies, from pastor to pastor. Every pastor has his own way of ministering and organizing his church or her church. Um, like I said, it's how he or she does the ministry and how she organizes in the activities and the functioning of the work of God in the church. So here in order of priorities in general terms are now first is preaching, two, prayer, three, teaching, four, pastoral ministry. The fifth is purple visiting, six, attention to the facilities of the temple, seven, attention to the young adults and children, eight, care for the sick, nine, help to those in need, and 10, attention to the family. Now, here, like I said, this is how it's in order here, but for me and the way I see things is I do believe that prayer should be first, but like I said, every the way a pastor does his ways of organizing the ministry, it says here that preaching comes first. But like I said, every pastor does his or her way of interacting within the congregation as far as for um, organization and activities. And then if you can see there, it goes down the list of teaching. Um, Number 10 is attention to the family. And I'm like, I think that should be like maybe the third one. Because if you don't get your family, you know, as a whole, as a Christian family, then you might encounter other problems later on in life with your children and then them wandering off and such a thing. But of course, like I said, it's just me, how I view it. The priorities come different to all pastors in different ways, but that's my opinion. Um, then you have explained the importance of the pastor's dictating time and study. Here, how he just takes his time and like he has the whole time in the world to do, go on vacations and so forth. Nope. He needs to find time to dedicate into continuing studying about the word and finding, different topics or themes for sermons and so forth for preaching and just a lot of things here. Systematic studying, it says there in the pastor who is interested in the congregation. The lecture study is called, a routine. You don't want that in church. You don't want just the same thing over and over. You want different things to occur, where the congregation sees, okay, there's a different types of, sermons, preaching. It just varies on the pastor, of course. So if you go to the next page, and I believe this is the last page. Like I said, I apologize if it was just a rush, but trying to do this so you can just, if you want to listen to this recording, you can, but in a nutshell, you just can just read the book. And then I'll give you the key words more or less to go and look for you to study. The next one explains the best way to administer the pastor's money. Um, the pastor's own money is mandatory. What God gives us is for that we can survive here in this world. He provides for us that we can serve Him, so that we do not leave His work because we could not maintain ourselves or because we cannot make ends meet with whatever we receive. We have to learn how to manage what God gives us. So here you have your tithes and your offering and your promises and things that do um every week or every month, however you feel like you're doing your handling money. But this is talking about the pastors. Then you have present the methodology of the pastors should be used in managing the church finances and how your money is being used as far as for keeping the temple clean, ordering new things such as microphones for the preaching, instruments, things for the building, paying electricity bill, all of that comes into play when it comes to the congregation's finances. How does it being managed? How is it being, recorded? Can you get, like a statement saying how much you gave and all that? It has to play a factor in the reference to the church's finances. So that concludes the whole book here from where we left off. And I'm right now, I'm just going to give you like real quick pointers like the type of questions that might be in the test. So, if I believe you're going next week to take the test, I'm not too sure how that works for you, but I'm just gonna give you key points and questions and what to look for, and so that way you can study a little bit more at ease. Okay, so for sure it's gonna ask you what is the path of theology about? And then if you go into your book, it tells you the definition, what is pathotheology. Okay. Now there, it might be an open-ended question, I believe it is. Yes, it is. So you basically just describe what is the pathotheology about. And then you can fill that part right there. And it's on the first page. Then you have what are the five different aspects of pathotheology? No, I'm sorry, the six types of frameworks, I'm sorry, frameworks in pastoral theology. So to just look for frameworks. I believe um there's six. Those you would need to write them in. Um, such as like spiritual, moral, emotional, social. You need to go in, and it's on page one as well, and it's towards the bottom. Number three says, "Is it the pastor's field of work?" What is it? You can just write it. Number four, what is the difference between an evangelist and a pastor? Just make sure you know the difference between both. I believe that's on page three. You can just give it a brief description of what the difference between both. Number five, um, here it talks about what is the difference between. Okay, yeah, I already said that one. Oh, no, I'm sorry. Number five, it says the remains in place for the souls of the Lord and spirituality. They're just filling the blanks. Now, I'm not too sure if you'll be able to use like an open book for this because since it was, well, I feel, like I said, apologies, rushed, and I'll talk to Hermano Jacinto to see whether it can be an open book for you. Because I know it's a lot of information just jammed into one recording. Um, but I'll mention it to him and see what he tells me, and I'll let you know. Then you have number six. The pastor must depend on God and maintain his. Then you have three selections, and you would have to circle either A, B, or C. And that I believe you can find it on page five. Then you have another question. It is the result of a spiritual experience and biblical Christian teachings. Well, talking about the teachings, Christian teachings. So you would have to answer multiple choice. Then you have what is the pastor's attitude towards his commitment? No, how do you see a pastor's character, his commitments? Um, then you have number 10. What is the pastor's character, his way of thinking, his thoughts? And I believe that one is on page, his attitude and commitments, all page 7. It's in there. How he's seen his public view, human relationships, attitudes, his commitments, and such. That would help you there. Now, in there's another section to the test. It says relate. There, you would have to find keywords within this book. And like I said, it's a lot of information. And I'll give you keywords that you can maybe just note down and then look for it on your own. But for sure, you would have to know these several, um, I don't want to say that they're definitions or they're keywords, but you can find them within the book. You would have to know what is personality, vocation, the private prayer, pastoral theology, character, ministerial appeal, profession, ministry, innate, and pastor. So this one's it's like a you would have to fill column A with column B and find like what matches with what's definition. So do you have maybe like let's say the vocabulary word and you have to find a definition type. That's sort of like what it is in this part of the test. And you can find some of these in page 2 and it's all over the book. Um, but like I said, if you need any further help or anything that you might have questions on, just let me know. Send me a text or let my Jacinto know as far as for like when to take the test. I'm not too sure when, but I will mention to him if you can be given the choice to be an open book, and then I'll let you know from there. So this concludes the ending of the class, Pastoral Theology. And if you have any question, like I said, Victor, just let me know, send me a text, and I'll be happy to answer your questions. And like I said, I'll mention to Hermano Jacinto, and once I know if it's agreed that you can, and then I'll let you know. Have a good night and goodbye.